A big part of what makes reviewing randomly assigned games fun is coming across games I never would have heard of otherwise. Such is the case for Spacelords, a squad-based third-person shooter/brawler that boasts a big cast of characters, robust lore, deep customization, and production value that rivals mainstream games. Also, it's completely free to play. So why does it feel like nobody has heard of it? Journey with me to the Broken Planet, while I try to figure out if this mysterious game is a hidden gem or a polished turd. Welcome to Random Game Reviews. I made a spreadsheet of every game in the PlayStation Store and let a random number generator tell me which one to play and review. This time, the RNG is serving up Spacelords. Spacelords seems to take inspiration from a few different sources. The squad-based gameplay where you choose from multiple heroes, each with their own playstyle and special powers, feels a bit like Overwatch. The overall tone, aesthetic, and presentation gives off a Borderlands vibe. The scenario-based levels harken back to Left 4 Dead, and the third-person perspective and focus on close-quarter combat evokes Metal Gear Solid. The developers have added all of these ingredients together to make some sort of video game soup. Maybe there's a better analogy. Spacelords is a game with a lot of butts. No, not those kind of butts. What I mean is that for every positive thing I have to say about Spacelords, there's a caveat. For example, the presentation in this game is way cooler and slicker than what I would expect to see in a free-to-play game. The opening cinematic goes so hard and sets the tone for the game's campaign, which has a narrative through line with fully scripted dialogue and well-produced cutscenes. The whole game is heavily stylized and really focuses on evoking a sense of bad-acidness. And the character designs are quite strong, even though every character seems to straddle a fine line between cool and hideous. But Spacelords kind of feels like it was written and designed by 14-year-old boys. I'm not a prude or a stranger to swearing. I f***ing love swearing. But the dialogue in this game is so over the top with its vulgarity that even a like myself found it to be too much.
What the hell are you doing here? There's no decadent rock and roll on this planet.
Maybe not, but there's plenty of pussy for me to sink my teeth into.
Dream on, lover boy. Don't even think about putting me on that list of yours, you feel me?
More like edgelords, am I right? The 14-year-old boy theory is also supported by the fact that every female character in this game has big, honkin' bazongas. The gameplay in Spacelords is pretty solid. With your team of 4, you'll fight through wave after wave of enemies while trying to complete various objectives. You'll use a vast array of guns to shoot people, and your meaty biceps, which I also refer to as my guns, to beat people to death. Pummeling seems to be more efficient than shooting. Go figure. Though gun shooting does come in a few distinct flavors, like Snipey Snipes, Blasty Blasts, or Zappy Zaps. To spice things up, each character has their own special ability, like running on walls, erecting a shield, repelling enemies, flying, and so on. You'll also utilize a volatile material known as Aleph, which is central to the lore of this game. You can use it as a grenade to deal massive damage to enemies, but more often you need it for completing specific objectives. Each level is curated with a specific sequence of objectives that comprise a scenario which supports the story of the campaign. You'll find yourself shooting down ships, blowing up reactors, fighting gigantic bosses, and much more. Spacelords also has an antagonist system which pits one player against the 4-person hero squad for an added layer of difficulty. The antagonists seem to be much better at the game than I am. The gameplay is solid without being flashy, and is pretty fun when you get matched with a decent team. But Spacelords is kind of a drag if you don't have anyone to play with. If the game is unsuccessful in finding someone to throw down with you, you'll have to play with a team of AI players that are decent at killing enemies but have no clue what to do when presented with a complicated objective. For example, one level has you gather Aleph to feed into a terminal, while enemies are also trying to steal that Aleph back out from the same terminal. Because the AI could only seem to focus on shooting people, they would neither harvest Aleph or defend the terminal. Instead, they just ran around the map with their thumbs up their butts. This is a problem because the objective in this team-based game requires teamwork. and I couldn't do both things by myself at the same time. This resulted in a very frustrating 40 minutes of gameplay before I finally gave up. Without human teammates, the game feels pretty lifeless. And to add insult to injury, the matchmaking process takes f***ing forever. Getting into a match can take up to 4 minutes, which really gives you time to feel bad about how nobody wants to play with you. I tried to find some more consistent teammates by joining a space guild, specifically the guild Scrotumbulus, whose logo I cannot show you. But this guild, and most of the others I checked, seemed pretty inactive. Spacelords does have a player base, but not a big enough one for you to be reliably matched with human players more than half the time. Spacelords has a pretty decent variety of characters to play as, but it's a real grind to unlock them. Each character has a level requirement for unlock, and on top of that, you have to spend a large amount of gold to buy the character, which leads to a system that requires an immense number of hours to recruit everyone, rather than just giving you all the characters up front like in Overwatch. Also, there are so many different kinds of currencies in this game that it makes the end of each level take like a month to resolve, while it slowly itemizes the various pittances you've received. One thing I appreciate about Spacelords is that there are a lot of customization options via skins, character buffs, emotes, and weapons, and the game does not use predatory loot boxes to unlock those things. The game does still need to make money, which it does from players buying cosmetic items through the purchase of Mercury points, which can run anywhere between 7 and 134 Canadian dollars. Most everything else can be bought with currency earned by playing, and you can choose the specific upgrades and weapons you want to build for your characters. But the weapon upgrade system is confusing as heck. I sort of maybe understand it. You use kill points to extract mods from a warehouse, then you assign buffs and pay a massive fee to construct the gun, but only if you've opened a construction slot. Maybe I'll just stick to punching people. But all of the caveats aside, Spacelords comes out as a net positive because it's free. I can say with certainty that I had more than $0 worth of fun. Is it good? It's good enough. It's a surprisingly high-effort product for a free-to-play game. It's fast-paced, it looks great, the gameplay and mechanics are alright, but I suppose why it doesn't get that word-of-mouth bump is that Spacelords somehow manages to feel less than the sum of its parts. Earlier in the episode, I tentatively referred to the game as soup, but everyone loves soup. Soup is delicious. Maybe Spacelords is more like an in-flight meal. There's a full spread of things that are technically food that will nourish your body, and the plane you're eating it on is pretty cool, but at the end of the flight, you're probably not going to remember your meal as a fine dining experience. It's time to answer the question, would I play this game if I were not destined to do so? For Spacelords, the answer is sure. Spacelords is honestly a decent enough game with a lot of things to unlock and grind for if you decide it's something you really like, and there seem to be plenty of people who really like this game. I had a pretty alright time with it when I had humans to play with, but the game is basically trash if you have to play with AI. The presentation is as good as any mainstream shooter even if it's a bit immature, and it's free. It's a free game that doesn't cost you any money to play. So what do you want from it? Pay money for a different game if your standards are so high. In the realm of video games that cost $0, Spacelords is perfectly good. Thanks for joining me. I love doing this crazy RNG thing, but I also love giving the audience a chance to choose what I play. Leave a comment on this video letting me know what game you'd like to see me play for episode 20, and I'll randomly draw from the list of suggestions. The game can be anything from the PlayStation Store for either PS4 or PS5, as long as it doesn't require VR. Hit me with your best shot, and I'll see you next time on Random Game Reviews. Thank you to my Patreon subscribers for making this show possible. I put up a Twitter poll to see who would win in a head-to-head matchup between Soup and Butts. Soup didn't stand a chance.